You people always try something. That was the sentence. Dropped casually, like a gum wrapper on a clean floor. Except it wasn't casual. And it wasn't forgotten. Dr. Naomi Brooks stood in first class, boarding pass in hand, blazer crisp, suitcase by her side, when flight attendant Samantha Barnes said it with a tilt of her head and a tight-lipped smile. Loud enough for the rows behind to hear, sharp enough to slice the air. The kind of sentence that doesn't just insult a person, it calls into question their entire right to exist in a space. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She simply extended the pass again. 2A. First class. Purchased directly. Dr. Naomi Brooks. But Samantha wasn't looking at tickets. She was looking at skin. Judging by silence. Weighing by stereotype. She grabbed the pass anyway, held it up like it needed a second opinion from the sun, then shoved it back against Naomi's chest. "You don't look like a doctor," she muttered, a smirk tugging at one corner of her mouth. "You look like you belong in coach." That was the moment the cabin turned. The moment heads tilted, phones came out, whispers started. And the moment Naomi Brooks decided she wouldn't just sit down, she'd stand all the way up, without moving an inch. Because some stories don't begin with shouting. They begin with silence, presence, and precision. What unfolded over the next 10 minutes would become one of the most expensive PR disasters in airline history. A black story not about confrontation, but about calm, calculated power that can flip a system on its head without ever breaking a sweat. You're not just about to watch a story. You're about to experience a masterclass in dignity under pressure. So before we go deeper, take 2 seconds, hit subscribe. We tell black stories here. Real ones. The kind that don't just entertain, they educate. Now sit back. Breathe in. Because the next 25 minutes will change the way you see travel. And power. Forever. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. As Naomi remained standing in front of seat 2A, the noise behind her swelled into a low murmur of commentary, judgment, and unchecked bias. It spread like turbulence through the cabin, unseen, but impossible to ignore. "That's always how it starts," someone muttered from row 3. "She probably bought a basic ticket and just wandered up here hoping no one would notice." A businessman in 1B leaned toward his neighbor and added, "Watch. She's gonna start crying discrimination any second now." But Naomi didn't speak. Instead, she opened her phone and tapped a few lines of text. 3 messages. One to her executive assistant, one to legal, and one to a number labeled only, "Board Chair Personal." She slid the phone into her coat pocket and calmly took her seat. Samantha hadn't moved. She was too busy going live. With one hand on her phone and the other on her hip, she turned slightly to frame herself in the camera. "Hey fam," she said with a grin. "Welcome back to Sky T. You won't believe what's going on today." She tilted her head toward Naomi, not naming her but letting the camera do the work. Some folks just think they can sit wherever they want, no matter what their ticket says. Viewers started trickling in. 18, 37, 72 live. Meanwhile, the man in 1C had his own phone out. He was recording, too. Not for justice, not for proof, but for drama. "Flight fraud in real time," he captioned it, before uploading to X. "Let's see how this plays out." Assumptions flew faster than the aircraft ever would. "She's stalling. Fake name. That's not even a real Birkin." But Naomi said nothing. She smoothed her jacket, crossed her legs, and waited. Because real power doesn't panic. It doesn't plead. It prepares. That's the thing about black stories that don't fit the script. They don't start with shouting. They start with restraint. With quiet strength. With the confidence to let the room underestimate you, just long enough for them to walk into their own mistake. As the viewers climbed and the comments rolled in, no one realized what Naomi already knew. She didn't need to tell her truth. She just needed time for it to reveal itself. The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was a courtroom. Every passenger had taken a side, even if they hadn't said a word. Silence, too, has a volume. The young white woman in 3, it kept her eyes locked on her Kindle, but her hands trembled slightly with every swipe. She had seen what happened. She had heard the words. But she said nothing. Fear, discomfort, uncertainty, it all looked the same when it sat on someone's face. In row 4, James Reynolds, mid-50s, black, retired firefighter, watched the scene with growing frustration. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to Samantha, "but I saw her boarding pass. It said 2A. First class. No question." Samantha didn't even turn around. "Sir, please remain seated," she snapped. "Security is on the way. We don't need interference." Interference. That's what truth gets called when it threatens the lie. From across the aisle, an older man with a southern accent shook his head. "Why is this even a discussion?" he said loudly. "She doesn't belong up here. Look at her." His wife nudged him, not in disagreement, but in caution. Not because she thought he was wrong, but because she knew cameras were watching now. Naomi still hadn't moved. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest. Her posture hadn't changed since the moment she took her seat. There was no tension in her shoulders. No shift in her breathing. Just presence. And presence, when used right, is more powerful than protest. The live streams ticked upward, 130, 184, 212. Strangers in real time were forming opinions, building narratives, and choosing villains, all without context. Because that's the thing about bias. It doesn't need facts. Just a familiar story. She's playing the victim. She probably found that pass in the trash. Here comes the lawsuit. But there were voices, quiet, emerging ones, starting to speak. Maria Santos, 3B, Latina, aerospace engineering student, looked at Naomi, then at Samantha. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Not yet. She was still calculating whether her voice would matter here. Meanwhile, the man in 1C whispered to his camera, "This is what happens when people think money buys them access to anything." Naomi heard it all. But she didn't react. Because in rooms like this, reactions are currency, and she had already decided the price was too high. She would pay in something stronger. Proofs. And patience. The clunk of heavy boots on the jet bridge signaled the arrival of airport security. Not one, but 2 officers stepped on board. Broad shoulders. Bulletproof vests. Radio chatter buzzing at their hips. The tension in the cabin sharpened. Some passengers leaned forward. Others leaned away. Phones tilted higher, capturing every second. Officer Daniels took the lead. Early 40s, clean-shaven, carrying the kind of energy that expected compliance without question. He scanned the cabin, then focused on Samantha. "What's the issue?" "She's refusing to move to her assigned seat in coach," Samantha replied quickly, gesturing at Naomi. "I've asked multiple times. She's being non-compliant." Daniels turned to Naomi, sizing her up like a suspect, not a customer. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "I'm going to need you to step off the plane so we can sort this out." Naomi didn't blink, didn't flinch. She looked up, calm as ever, and said, "I'm in the seat I paid for. 2A. First class. Do you have proof of purchase?" Daniels asked. Without a word, Naomi reached into her bag. Not rushed. Not defensive. Just deliberate. From her wallet, she pulled out a black card, Platinum Amex Centurion, and placed it neatly on the tray table. Then came the business card. Sleek. Black. Embossed in silver. Naomi Brooks, Ph.D. Founder and CEO. Orion Dynamics. Daniels raised an eyebrow but didn't reach for it. "Anyone can print a card," Samantha mumbled. Naomi tilted her head, eyes sharp. "And anyone can embarrass themselves, apparently." The murmur in the cabin turned again. A few passengers who had stayed quiet were now watching Naomi with different eyes. "Captain Shaw needs to be informed," Naomi said plainly. "And I suggest you do it fast. You're about to make a very expensive mistake." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The kind that comes from someone who's used to negotiating deals that span 7 figures and multiple countries. Daniels hesitated. Samantha looked nervous now. The power dynamic had shifted, but only Naomi seemed to realize it fully. "Ma'am, please step off the aircraft," Daniels repeated, but softer this time. Naomi didn't move. Instead, she picked up her phone and tapped once. Somewhere, in a boardroom hundreds of miles away, a signal had just been sent. A contract alert. A status change. A flag raised. Because strategy doesn't shout. It signals. It prepares. It moves quietly before it moves visibly. And Naomi had just moved the board. The cockpit door swung open with a soft click, and Captain Derek Shaw stepped into the aisle. Tall, silver-haired, and composed, he carried the weight of 30 years in the skies. Passengers instinctively quieted. Even Samantha lowered her phone, the live stream still quietly running at her side. Captain Shaw's eyes swept the cabin. He saw Naomi sitting in 2A, her expression unreadable. Officer Daniels stood nearby, uncertain. Samantha looked tense. And the rest of the cabin? A courtroom of spectators, still watching, still recording. "What's the delay?" Shaw asked, voice clipped but calm. "Passenger in the wrong seat, Captain," Samantha answered quickly. "She's refusing to move." Shaw looked at Naomi again. "May I see your boarding pass, man?" Naomi didn't hesitate. She passed him the slip of paper and her ID with the same quiet grace that had defined her since boarding. He read them. Once. Then again. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but recognition. The name. The address. The title. He glanced at the business card on the tray. Orion Dynamics. Captain Shaw wasn't just an airline veteran. He'd flown aircraft leased from Orion. He'd sat in meetings about those contracts. And the woman in 2A. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the architect behind a fleet that his airline depended on. His voice dropped, more cautious now. "Ma'am, this appears in order. I just need to verify your booking with our system." "Of course," Naomi said, tone even. "Professional verification is always wise." Shaw pulled out a tablet from his bag and tapped into the airline's back end. The record popped up. Dr. Naomi Brooks. Seat 2A. First class. Ticket purchased directly through the airline's premier booking line. Paid in full. Nearly $3,000. He exhaled. Then noticed something else. A note on her account. Flagged. Partner level corporate. Internal use only. He looked up. "Ma'am, everything checks out. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Samantha paled. Daniels shifted his weight. Naomi said nothing. Just a small, polite nod. Shaw looked around the cabin. "I believe we owe Dr. Brooks an apology." The words were simple, but the silence afterward was louder. Because this wasn't just about a seat. It never was. And now, for the first time, everyone on that plane started to realize. They hadn't been watching a disruption. They'd been witnessing a reckoning. While Captain Shaw quietly confirmed the obvious, that Naomi Brooks belonged exactly where she was, another storm had already taken off. Social media. In row 1, the businessman with a camera, name tag still visible from a corporate conference, was narrating like a sportscaster. This lady tried to sneak into first class. Security had to come. It's wild. He had no idea what he was recording, or who he was broadcasting it to. By the time Captain Shaw handed Naomi back her ID, the video had 97 reposts, 340 likes, and was climbing. The caption read, "Entitled passenger refuses to leave first class. Typical." Except the story he thought he was telling was unraveling fast. In real time, viewers started asking questions. Someone zoomed in on Naomi's card from the video. Wait, is that Orion Dynamics? That's an aviation tech firm. Another comment followed. If she's the CEO, this airline is screwed. And then, oh my God, I just looked her up. That's Naomi Brooks. She owns part of the fleet. The floodgates opened. Aviation TikTok picked it up. Twitter threads spun wild. Reddit communities in law, tech, and corporate culture started analyzing the video frame by frame. Someone posted a screenshot of Naomi giving a keynote at a recent aerospace summit. Another linked to an article titled, "Meet the Woman Who Quietly Changed the Future of Commercial Aviation." Hashtag Dr. Naomi Brooks. Hashtag OrionGate. Hashtag Fly with Respect. They were all trending by the time Officer Daniels stepped back and sat down. Samantha still had her phone in her hand, but now her screen was filled with comments she didn't want to see. This is your boss's boss. Delete this while you still have a job. Too late. The internet saw everything. In 3B, Maria Santos was refreshing her own feed. Her hands trembled. She was watching Naomi's name explode across every aviation platform she followed. As an aerospace student, she had studied Naomi, respected her, and now she was watching her live, endure a scene that never should have happened. The cabin was silent, but outside the aircraft, the noise was deafening. News outlets were already clipping the video. Industry insiders were texting screenshots. Legal blogs were writing think pieces. Naomi didn't need to say anything. She had let the internet speak for her. And once the truth started trending, there was no pulling it back. Naomi waited until the cabin fell quiet again. The attention was now fully hers, not because she demanded it, but because the moment insisted on it. She reached into her blazer pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a second business card. This one was smaller, simpler. No silver emboss. No glossy finish. Just clean, minimal type on thick matte stock. She laid it gently on the tray table. Derek Shaw saw it first. His brow furrowed. Then his eyes widened. Maria Santos in 3B leaned forward, squinting, then covered her mouth with both hands. She had seen that name before. Not Naomi's, but the one printed on the card just below her name. Vanguard Capital Partners. Naomi Brooks, co-founder and COO. Private equity, transportation sector specialist. The atmosphere shifted again. Another layer of identity, another layer of power. Not only did she lead Orion Dynamics, the company that designed and leased advanced aircraft systems to major airlines, she also co-led Vanguard Capital, one of the firms that invested in those airlines, including this one. Samantha's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Naomi's voice, calm and even, broke the silence. I would suggest someone from corporate be notified. Not a manager. Not a gate supervisor. Someone who understands the depth of our relationship. Captain Shaw stepped forward, voice low. Ma'am, are you telling me you have an equity stake in Atlantic Airlines? Naomi met his eyes, unflinching. Indirectly, yes. Vanguard holds a 12% position in your parent company. I helped lead that acquisition. Even Officer Daniels took a step back. From somewhere in the cabin, the man in 1C whispered into his phone, "She owns the company." This just flipped completely. The internet was catching up fast. Someone on X posted an article from Bloomberg with Naomi's name under a list of rising black women in private equity. Another tweet read, "This woman didn't just buy a seat. She bought the damn aircraft." Samantha slowly turned off her live stream. Too late. The footage was already archived, mirrored, downloaded, and reposted. Naomi leaned back in her seat, hands folded, gaze forward. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown a fit. She had simply added one more piece to the puzzle, One more reason to sit still and let the truth rearrange the room. Because when power wears two names, it doesn't have to explain itself. It just places the next card. The shift in the cabin was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. What began as a whisper of doubt had now become a full collapse of confidence. For the crew, for the assumptions they carried, and for the systems they thought would protect them. Captain Shaw stood frozen for a beat too long, his eyes fixed on the second card as if it had changed gravity in the room. In some ways, it had. Samantha took a step back, no longer clinging to confidence, but to confusion. "I didn't know," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Naomi finally spoke again. Her tone remained even, professional, but sharp enough to cut through every defense. "Not knowing is not an excuse," she said. "Not verifying. Not following protocol. Not pausing to question the assumptions behind your actions." She let the silence breathe after each sentence. The kind of silence that forces reflection. The captain cleared his throat. "Dr. Brooks, I deeply regret this series of events. I will be contacting our regional executive immediately." Naomi gave a short nod. "That would be wise. I'll also be forwarding a summary of this incident to my legal and investor relations teams. The footage alone speaks volumes." In row 3, Maria Santos was now live on her own phone. Her caption was short, "When quiet power speaks." She panned her camera to Naomi, who remained composed, then to Samantha, whose face had turned pale, eyes darting nervously between her phone and the door. Meanwhile, corporate headquarters was already stirring. In the background, the captain's radio crackled with chatter. Ground control wanted answers. Their departure window was shrinking. The airline's internal notification system had flagged the passenger manifest. Names had been matched. Contracts identified. What had been treated as a seating dispute was now classified as a Tier 1 customer escalation with legal exposure. And Samantha? She was no longer sure if she'd be flying tomorrow. The weight of her choices pressed down hard now. Not from Naomi's words, but from the consequences that had begun stacking up with every passing second. Because that's the thing about certainty. When it's built on bias, it doesn't crack slowly. It collapses all at once. Captain Shaw stepped aside to make the call. He didn't need protocol. He needed protection. He dialed the emergency executive line, the one reserved for mid-air threats and legal escalations. This wasn't a threat to the aircraft, it was a threat to the company. Meanwhile, Naomi opened an app on her phone. The dashboard lit up. Contract timelines, leasing agreements, investor impact projections. She scrolled once, then tapped twice. That was all it took. Across the country, at the headquarters of Atlantic Airlines, 3 executives received real-time alerts. Legal, public relations, investor relations. Corporate reckoning didn't come with explosions. It came with quiet signals sent by people who understood leverage. Back on the plane, Officer Daniels had stepped out of the aisle. He had seen enough. This wasn't his jurisdiction anymore, it was far above his pay grade. Samantha stood stiffly near the galley, her phone off now, hands clasped tight. Her confidence, once animated by assumption, had dissolved into silence. Naomi looked up and spoke with the same unshaken clarity that had defined her from the beginning. "I'm requesting 3 immediate actions," she said, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. 1. Termination of any employee who participated in live streaming this event without consent. 2. Suspension of all flight crew involved pending formal investigation. 3. A formal apology from corporate leadership addressing the nature of this incident and the assumptions that caused it. Captain Shaw returned, his face pale. He nodded slowly. Legal is already reviewing the footage. They're preparing a statement. The executives have been alerted. Naomi continued, "Your airline operates 14 aircraft leased from Orion Dynamics. We're currently negotiating for 20 more. I suggest those discussions be paused until this matter is resolved transparently." A ripple moved through the cabin. The businessman in 1C stopped recording. Maria Santos was still live, now translating for her bilingual audience, her stream crossing into Latin America. Passengers weren't just watching. They were witnessing a lesson in how real power moves, with calm, clarity, and receipts. This wasn't retaliation. It was alignment between consequence and cause. As Captain Shaw relayed Naomi's demands to corporate, Samantha looked down at her badge for the last time. The reckoning had arrived. And it was wearing a blazer and a calm voice. The silence didn't last. It never does after a reckoning. The cabin, once divided by whispers and side glances, began to shift again, this time toward reflection. It started with the man in 1C, the same one who'd recorded the entire incident like it was a sporting event. He stood up, slowly, facing Naomi. "I want to apologize," he said, voice low but carrying through the cabin. "I assumed. I judged. I didn't ask questions. I just recorded." He held up his phone like it was part of the confession. "My video's out there now, and it's being shared. But I'll post the truth, too. The full truth." Naomi didn't speak. She nodded once. That was enough. In 3A, the young white woman who had stayed quiet earlier now spoke up, her voice trembling. "I saw it happen. I heard what the flight attendant said to you. And I said nothing. I kept my head down because I didn't want to get involved." She paused, then added, "That was cowardice. I know that now." From 4B, James Reynolds, the retired firefighter, looked over and gave her a nod of respect. "Owning it matters," he said. "A lot of folks never do." Maria Santos turned her phone off. Her stream had gained over 200 viewers in less than 10 minutes. All aviation students. All people who, like her, were watching how the industry responded to its own blind spots. She looked at Naomi and said, "You taught us more in 20 minutes than some of us learn in 4 years." And then, something unexpected. The elderly woman in 2D, who earlier had whispered her own assumptions, quietly reached for her husband's hand. She didn't speak right away. But after a long pause, she looked at Naomi and said, "I was part of the problem. I let a pattern play out, and I nodded along like it was normal." Her voice cracked. "It's not." Naomi finally spoke again, her tone gentle but firm. "Change doesn't begin when someone gets caught. It begins when someone chooses to see what they ignored." The cabin exhaled, together, because now, it wasn't just about Naomi. It was about everyone on board, what they saw, what they allowed, and what they would do the next time silence asked for their permission. Reflection had begun. And with it, the possibility of something better. Naomi could have ended it there. She had every right to. The apology had been made. The truth had gone viral. Her power had been recognized and feared. The damage was done. The point was made. But Naomi Brooks wasn't built for revenge. She was built for reconstruction. She opened her tablet and pulled up a file labeled Airfare Initiative, a program her team had quietly been developing for months, one designed to address the very issues now unfolding in front of her eyes. She looked up at Captain Shaw, then across the cabin. "I'm not interested in a personal settlement," she said. "I'm interested in system-wide change." The captain nodded. "We'll do whatever is necessary." "Then here's what's necessary," Naomi continued. "Mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing employees. A formalized passenger verification protocol that prioritizes documentation over assumption. A 24-hour passenger advocacy hotline monitored by a neutral oversight board." She paused, letting the list settle into the air. "And quarterly reporting of diversity metrics submitted to the FAA, made public." Shaw blinked. "That's a lot." "It's just the beginning," Naomi replied. Her tone wasn't aggressive. It was architectural, like someone laying a foundation, brick by brick, policy by policy. "This isn't about punishing one employee," she added, glancing toward the galley where Samantha had disappeared. "This is about dismantling a culture that let her believe she wouldn't be held accountable." Maria Santos started recording again, this time for a very different purpose. She was no longer documenting a scandal. She was documenting reform in real time. Passengers deserve more than service, Naomi said, now addressing the cabin. They deserve dignity. Several heads nodded. Others, still unsure of how to respond, just listened. And that was enough, for now. The CEO who had once been mistaken for a seat thief was now rewriting how the skies themselves would treat future travelers. Naomi looked at her screen. The framework was ready. She emailed it to Atlantic Airlines legal department and CC'd 3 government transportation officials. Not a threat. A blueprint. Not about her. About everyone. Because real leadership doesn't stop at calling out what's broken. It stays long enough to build something better. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, the engines humming softly beneath the cabin floor, Naomi Brooks settled into her seat, not just as a passenger, but as a symbol of what happens when dignity refuses to bend. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't demanded special treatment. She didn't weaponize her title or her wealth. She just stayed calm, clear, and unshakably prepared. That, more than anything, was what changed the course of this flight, and maybe a little bit of the industry around it. What this moment proved was simple. Power doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always wear a badge or hold a microphone. Sometimes, power sits quietly in seat 2A with a business card and a plan. Naomi didn't just defend her right to a seat. She defended the right of every underestimated traveler to be seen, respected, and treated with basic humanity. No matter their appearance, their background, or how many times they've been told they're in the wrong place. And that's the lesson worth carrying far beyond this plane. Because the world will assume. It will test you. It will try to shrink you to fit its own narrow comfort. But your power. It doesn't need approval. It just needs to be ready. Prepared power is silent but unstoppable. Quiet power doesn't beg, it builds. And when rooted in truth, it becomes the loudest form of justice. So here's your moment of reflection. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever watched someone be dismissed, spoken over, or pushed aside simply because they didn't fit a stereotype? What did you do? And more importantly, what will you do next time? If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you look at power through a new lens, share it. Let it ripple. Let it sit with someone else who needs it. And if you're here for more stories that center truth, challenge silence, and elevate voices often ignored, tap that subscribe button. Because we don't just tell stories here. We tell Black stories. Real ones. And just like Naomi Brooks, we don't raise our voices to be heard. We raise the standard, and let the world catch up.